Hello and good afternoon. So, I think we are trying to understand the Russian school of formalism. And I remember that in the last clip, I talked about literariness or poeticity. Then I told you the difference between day-to-day language and literary language. And then I explained the process of defamiliarization. And it has been the major concern for the Russian formalists. So today I'll talk about certain devices which are used in literature and specifically in poetry. See, the Russian school of formalism, it assumes that literature makes use of certain devices. And specifically, poetry makes use of certain devices. So which are the devices? See, the devices are like repetition, hyperbole, iambic pentameter, parallelism, and paradox. Fine. See, at one place, Roman Jacobson says that poetry is an organized violence committed on ordinary speech, and it impedes the ordinary speech. Fine. So, this is something which has been said by Roman Jacobson. So he calls poetry an organized violence committed on ordinary speech. So this thing is basically done with the help of certain devices. Now I'm going to talk about some of these devices. So the first one is, hyperbole. I'm not going into the detail of these devices, and I'll be telling you something about them in very short. So you know what is a hyperbole, right? And you can find so many examples of hyperbole in literature. Say for example, there is a statement in The Rape of the Lock. In fact, it is a line in The Rape of the Lock, and it is about Belinda. So the line is Belinda smiled and all the world was gay. So this is an example of hyperbole. I mean, things have been exaggerated, right? Then come to repetition. Repetition. So it is a rhetorical device to bring attention to an idea by repeating words, phrases, and sentences. Right. So I hope you all remember a poem written by Robert Frost, and that is Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. So I'm just narrating some lines, and I think these are the last lines of the poem. Uh, the woods are lovely, dark, and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. So here we find the repetition of, this sentence, miles to go before I sleep and miles to go before I sleep. So this is an example of repetition. Fine. Now come to parallelism. See, it is basically the use of components in a sentence that are grammatically the same or similar in their construction, sound, meaning, or meter. Say, for example, if I say Mary ran into the room, into the park, and into our hearts. So here we see repetition of phrase, and the repetition of phrase, it gives the sentence balance, rhythm, and flow also, right? Then in literature you can find so many examples of parallelism. Say for example, you can quote the poem How Do I Love Thee? So the poem has been written by Elizabeth Barrett Browning, And I'm just quoting two lines from the poem. The lines are, I love thee freely as men strive for right. I love thee purely as they turn from praise. So here the two lines have been made parallel by the repetition of I love thee. Is that clear? Then you can have examples of parallelism in novels also. So you can have so many examples, but let me quote just one example, and this is from a book which I feel you all might have read. And the book is The God of Small Things. Fine. I'm sure that you all might have gone through this book. I hope that you remember the character of Velutha in the book. Velutha, he is the son of Velya Papan, and they are from the low caste society. Fine. So Velutha is the son of Velya Papan, and if you remember, Velutha has one brother also, and that is Kuttapan. So what happens in the story? Once Kuttapan was climbing a coconut tree, and when he was climbing the coconut tree, he fell down, and in this process, he became paralyzed. Fine. Now try to compare this incident with the with the real life incident in the life of Velutha. Don't you feel that Velutha is also climbing to pluck a fruit? And I feel, or metaphorically, you just can say that he's trying to eat the forbidden fruit. And what is that forbidden fruit? This forbidden fruit is, Ammu, because Ammu is a lady from the upper class society, and according to the then taboo of the Keralite society, a Dalit or someone from the low caste cannot have, relationship with someone who is from the upper caste society. Right. So Ammu is just like a forbidden fruit to Velutha, but he's trying to eat it. And what are the consequences? He was killed, rather, you just can say that he was murdered in the police custody. So here is a kind of parallelism between Kuttapan and Velutha. Kuttapan is also climbing the heights, and he is climbing to pluck a fruit, and in this process he fell down and he became paralyzed. In the same way, Velutha is also climbing, and he is trying to pluck the forbidden fruit of sexuality, that is Ammu, and in this process he also fell down. Metaphorically, I mean, he was beaten very harshly. You know what happened with him in the police station, right? And ultimately he also died. So this is an example of parallelism in the God of small things. Is that clear? Then iambic pentameter, I mean, the other device is iambic pentameter, and it is very simple. It's a line with 5 metrical feet with 10 syllables, where the short one is followed by the long one. Say for example the word before, 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 before. So here the short syllable is followed by the long syllable, right? Then the other device is paradox, paradox. Fine. Now, what is a paradox? It is basically a kind of contradictory statement. Fine. And its best example you can find in Paradise Lost. Though you can find a number of examples in poetry, but I'm just giving one example, and that is from Paradise Lost, right? I hope you might have gone through at least the first two books of Paradise Lost. See, in the very first book, Milton says that in Paradise Lost, he's trying to justify the ways of God to man. Right? Now try to have a look at the first two books. So in the first two books, you'll find that Satan, he has been presented as a gigantic figure, and he has been presented as a hero, and he has been presented as a towering figure. And if you remember, he has been very much appreciated by Milton. Fine. And that's why, Blake said that in writing Paradise Lost, Milton is of devil's party. Now, where lies the contradiction? The contradiction is that, on the one hand, Milton is trying to say that he's trying to justify the ways of God to man. Means whatever God does is absolutely right. Nobody can raise any finger on the decisions of God. So God is everything. There can be no doubt on the entity and on the decisions of God. But on the other hand, he's appreciating the Satan, I mean, who is the greatest enemy of God. Right? So, how is it possible that on the one hand he is trying to justify the ways of God to men, and on the other hand he is appreciating Satan, the Satan who is the greatest enemy of God? So, it is somehow contradictory. Fine. Actually, Milton came to know about it, after completing two books, and then he made a gradual deterioration in the character of Satan. So, in the first two books, Satan is everything. He's like a hero. He's a towering personality, and he's much appreciated. But after the first two books, Milton makes a deterioration in his character. So the character of Saturn, it goes through a journey, and that is from a hero, then to a commander, then to a leader, then to a secret service agent who can peep into the bathroom of a lady, and finally, a serpent. Fine. So this is the example of paradox, and in uh, Paradise Lost. This is also an example of psychobiographical writing. I hope you know what is psychobiographical writing. If you don't know, please let me know. Anyways, so the Russian school of formalism, it assumes that paradox is a must for the good health of poetry, right? So the view is that poetry should carry the elements of heterogeneity. Why? Because homogeneous poetry cannot be a ironic contemplation. So it simply means that irony and ambiguity are essential for good poetry. So the force of paradox, it basically holds a poem together, and it builds unity within the text, and the task of a critic is to lay bare the paradoxes and show how they work. Getting my point? The task of a critic is to lay bare those paradoxes and show how they work. I hope everything is clear to you. I'm just trying to simplify each and everything. Then there are some more, terms and devices, I mean, which have been talked about by the Russian school of, formalism. And I'm trying to explain, I mean, these terms also one by one. So these terms are, say, for example, fabula and Suze. Fabula and Suze. So what is fabula and what is Suze? See, fabula, Fabula, right? And Suze, Suzhet. So we pronounce it Suze. So what is fabula and what is Suze? See, fabula is basically, chronological sequence of events in a narration. And Suze is basically the representation of those events through narration and metaphor. So you can say that fabula is the raw material of a story, and Suze, this is basically the way the story is organized. So let me simplify it. See, uh, fabula refers to the chronological sequence of events. Fine. And Suze, it refers to the order and manner in which, they are actually presented in the narrative. And for your kind information, this is basically Suze that creates the defamiliarizing effect. Now, let me clarify, these two terms with the help of, one crime story. See, there is a crime story. What is the crime story? Oh, let us talk about the story in some points. See, there was a crime. Fine. Then the police went to investigate it. Right. Then they had to take the help of a detective. And then finally, the detective, he solves the crime. And this is the end of the story. Fine. So let us talk about this story through points A, B, C, and D. So point A is there was a crime. Point B, the police went to investigate. Point C, they had to seek the help of a detective. And point D, the detective, he finds out the solution and he solves the crime. So if we narrate the story from point A to point D, I mean first, point A, then point B, then point C, and then point D. I mean in a sequence. So if we narrate this story in a sequence, so it means this is an example of fabula, right? And what is Suze? This is manipulation of events, right? So we can say that manipulation of the Suze, it allows the story to be told in a different and in a more defamiliarized manner. How? See, we can start the story from the point D. And what is the point D? In the point D, the crime has been solved. So we can begin the story, you know, from the point where it ends. I mean, we can begin the story from the D point, or we can start the story from the middle of the sequence, right? And we can even tell the story from the point of view of the killer, right? So this is basically a kind of manipulation. I hope you are getting the two terms. In fabula, there is a kind of chronological narration. It goes from point A, then to B, then to C, and then to D in a sequence. But in Suze, we have the liberty of manipulating the events, right? So, you know, it basically makes for a new way of telling a common plot. So I hope the difference between fabula and Suze is clear to all of you. Fine. Then the next term is close reading. I hope you are aware of it. See, when we make a reading of a text, you know, it is said that I mean, according to this approach, I mean formalism. I mean, it says that we ought to focus on the text of a work. Means when we read a text, so we must focus on the text of this work and we should exclude the author's intention, historical and cultural contexts. Right. So the text is an object of literature and it is complete in itself. It is an autonomous entity. It is an autonomous body. And therefore, it should be treated as one that is not dependent on its creator or external, factors. Right. So, if the goal of reading a text is to get its meaning, then we should not look beyond the text. Why? Because form and meaning, they are intimately connected, and they should not be analyzed separately. Is that clear? And you know very well that good literature is the literature that transcends the time of the author. Who cares if X was in love with Lady Y? So we should avoid the details of such, fact that who if X was in love with Y, and we should focus on how the story focuses on scorned love. Is that clear? I hope this is also clear to you. Close reading is also clear to you. Then the next term is, so we have two more terms, emotional and intentional fallacies. Emotional and intentional fallacies. Right. Now, if you talk about intentional fallacy and affective fallacy, so we find that William Wimsatt and Monroe Beardsley, they wrote an essay, the intentional fallacy. So in it, they talked about the intentional fallacy and the affective fallacy. So what is the intentional fallacy? See, you might have used the two terms so many times in your MA classes. So I'm just telling you in very, very short. See, the intentional fallacy is the mistake of analyzing a text through author's intention. So it simply means that a text cannot be analyzed through the intention of the author. Why? Because the text is everything. And we should not look beyond the text. The author is dead. So the intention of the author, it becomes useless in analyzing a text. So the intentional fallacy, it is the error, it is the mistake of analyzing a text through the intention of the author, right? Then affective fallacy, or this is basically the mistake of analyzing a text through its emotional impact on readers. Right. So again, a text should not be analyzed on the basis of its emotional impact on readers, on the basis of its, emotional effect on readers. So once again, the text is everything. It is an autonomous body, and there is nothing beyond the text. Right. So, it simply means that a literary work, it has its own ontology. A literary work, it has its own ontology. So, these are some more elements which have been talked about by the Russian school of formalism.